what is somatic coaching? So what are we talking about? Why is it so important now?
Somatic coaching as the body is really kind of help people or practitioners tune into that kind of lived experience. So instead of thinking through things, it's actually kind of what are you experiencing? It's just creating a slightly different view, but taking you out of your head and your thinking part and getting more into a somatic part. There's a huge amount of that sits below your head within your body. So twice as much information coming up from the body into the brain than actually going down. The amount of change and complexity that we all face right now is at times can be quite overwhelming.
We get very worked up and very stressed and have very high anxiety. We start to get into fight or flight mode.
I would feel quite a lot of tension across my chest, particularly where I was going into what I perceived to be quite a difficult conversation.
The body language can impact other people. That body language is rooted in something, and that piece is what's impacting your own behavior. Actually, we're trying to get to the root cause of why your body is deciding to show up that way.
Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
Welcome back to Breaking the Chain. I am so excited this week. We have a phenomenal guest and an absolutely incredible topic. We want to talk today about somatic coaching. And interestingly, I was catching up with someone over the last couple of years. We've stayed connected. We had an amazing call, started to discuss and open up this topic. And I realized how undereducated I was on even what it is. And today I'm joined by James Edgar. He's the Chief People Officer at Signature Discovery with nearly 30 years of leadership experience across sectors, including financial services, manufacturing, facility management, and advertising. He also runs his own coaching practice, the Black Polar Bear, really cool name, where he works as a somatic coaching practitioner and mentoring and coaching C-suite leaders, senior execs, and HR professionals. And he blends the corporate leadership experience with somatic practice to support building resilient and impactful teams. He has a very particular and interesting lens to leadership through his work with somatic coaching. And it is an approach that really goes beyond mindset and behavior and into how the body, the nervous system, and lived experiences can shape the way leaders show up, make decisions, and lead under pressure. So today in this conversation, we're going to explore exactly what somatic coaching is, why it's becoming increasingly relevant across for modern day leaders, and how working with the body can help you unlock and become more grounded, resilient, and authentic in the way you approach leadership. Welcome, James. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on the podcast, and thanks for the really kind intro. Really, really pleased to be here.
Hopefully I did it justice. It's probably my most nerve-wracking part of the beginning of the episode. Did I pronounce the name right? Have I said the right institutions? But today, obviously, I'd love to, we talked about this when we started. I think a lot of people probably are going to come into this and not understand what is somatic coaching. So can you kick us off? And for everyone who's listening or tuning into the episode now,
somatic coaching, as the name suggests, uses the soma, so it's the body. And what it does do is really kind of help people or practitioners tune into that kind of lived experience. So instead of thinking through things, it's actually kind of what are you experiencing and really living from the inside out. I think, if I look at kind of Western society, we really value analytics thinking, and that's important, but it's only one part of you, and the whole of your body holds emotions, experiences, but also helps influence how you show up, how you interact with people, and really create connections. So this practice really is about kind of tapping into both the wisdom and insight, but also helping you show up in a slightly different way through choices that you can make.
And I know we were chatting about this because people have pushed back on you to say, well, what is this, just body language? Or, I mean, when you're deciphering between what people are demonstrating externally and what, somatic coaching or that leadership principle is, how would you differentiate between the two? What are maybe some of the more differentiating factors?
Yeah, I mean, I think somatic coaching is about really kind of tuning into your own experience, and that's really through noticing, awareness, and scanning. As you say, it's not body language. So the frequent thing about body language is it must be a clue to something. So when you cross your arms, you must be defensive. That's not always the case. And so somatics is less about that kind of external read, but it's more, as I say, starting from the way in, just really understand, what you're feeling. There's a huge amount of data that sits below your head within your body, both in terms of how you're experiencing things, how you feel about things, but also how you store things. So somatic coaching is really starting to try and unpack that, build awareness, but also give people choice. And it's a really useful shift, particularly for people who are kind of incredibly analytical, to actually take a different lens and move away from maybe their kind of well-trodden path to seeing the same issue or same practice or pattern in a slightly different way. And I think there's a body of evidence that's starting to really grow around the importance of soma and somatics. There's huge amounts of research now that talks about the amount of information that kind of passes from the brain down and back up. So one of the biggest nerves is the polyvagal nerve, and actually there's huge amounts of data that shows actually there's twice as much information coming up from the body into the brain than actually going down. So it shows you that body and the nervous system actually work in tandem together, and actually this type of coaching is really trying to tap into kind of really holistic practice.
What sort of brought this to your attention? Like, what got you thinking about somatic coaching or wanting to give this more focus within your own practice? Or I guess, when did you recognize personally that this was quite like something to further explore or bring like voice to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I hadn't really heard of it until I actually started training as a coach about 12 years ago. And I had a somatic practitioner come and demonstrate some of the techniques. And what really amazed me was just how much movement I managed to get just in role playing and practicing with a practitioner in a really short space of time. And I would have told you going into that, it might not be for me, lots of stuff around that feels a bit new age. It feels quite hippie. It's, a bit out there. But what really triggered something in me was just actually a lot about my own self-awareness. So I was highly analytical and still am. But what it really did do is kind of tune into kind of repeating patterns that actually I held or was doing, and just noticing some of that allowed me to be a bit more choiceful about what I wanted to do. And it's one of those things that, it feels quite hard to grasp because it's not as tangible as a very clear process that you might write down, but you can see it kind of just in day lives. When my kids were younger, I think I mentioned this to you before, I watch them in the playground, and it's interesting to see how kids get drawn to some kids but not others. And that's not because they've spoken anything between them. It's just this natural connection. So it really got me interested in understanding, that kind of power of presence, but also that power of connection. And as I've gone through and developed my practice, I'm still developing. I think there's always continual development with it. I've just found it incredibly powerful with clients who get stuck, and their patterns allow them to get stuck and repeat that stuckness. And somatics is a really powerful way of just unsticking them and giving them a different way of thinking about it, experiencing it, and also interrupting some of those patterns. It's super popular, particularly in counseling and therapy. And so I've kind of just helped move it into the coaching space, and I've worked with fantastic practitioners that have just really opened my eyes. But it's kind of allowed me to see different situations in very different ways, and then equally kind of bring that into my coaching practice with customers and clients as well.
Do you think it's more applying it to yourself, or is it more about how it's impacting other people? Because obviously we can chat around breathing exercises and control, and I'm sure they're very much interconnected. But I suppose when you're maybe coming to someone and starting to introduce this topic and working with a new client, what's maybe the primary benefits? Is it initially, hey, I'm actually how I show up for other people, or is it how you show up for yourself?
The work we do is always starting with the individual first. It's really to try and raise the awareness for them. It varies on the client, obviously, but what we try and do is really just get some real depth to their own self-awareness, whether it's in a particular situation or more generally. My coaching framework is really trying to look at what makes people tick and understand that real depth. And so then you can start making some sustainable change that's authentic to people. And so I think then you can start working on connection. And when I look at, leaders of today, it becomes an incredibly complex world. We talked about VUCA a couple of times in some of the chats that we've had. As a leader right now facing into just that volatility, it can feel quite overwhelming. And so actually some of the somatic practice is really about how you come back to settling that nervous system. It's not always about knowing everything, but it's actually bringing you back down to a state where actually you can make good decisions in that moment that's actually kind of lasting and authentic to where you are.
That's really interesting. I think, I really want to open up in this session around the practical applications, and maybe some things that people can take away from this session. But why do you think, and especially, I guess, since you've started getting involved in somatic coaching, but why do you think this is maybe so important and relevant now in the context of leadership and personal development? And yeah, I know we had some really amazing conversations, and we will get into maybe the influence of somatic coaching in an AI-driven world. But just in general, why do you think this is something that people should be really taking note of and emphasizing their development on?
I mean, I don't think it's a well-known field, actually, and I think it's growing both in terms of awareness and popularity, which is a good thing, but it probably shows the power of it. I suppose for me, it really centers on what you see as leadership. And so for me, I think leadership is really about how you can show up, provide clarity, but also create great followership. And in doing so, and I'm sure you'll be thinking about leaders where, people can say that they want to go this way and have conviction to it, but you don't always feel that commitment is congruent or you can buy into it, And so there's something in that says actually to really build trust, it's how you build that kind of authenticity and followership. And I think for me, leadership is very much about how do you tap into what's really important for you? What's your purpose, whether it's in this particular challenge that you're facing or more wider in terms of really what you want to be. And then really tapping into that authenticity that lives quite deep into here and just noticing how certain things impact you. So, the classic flight or flight, you can have an instance where, whether you fight or flight or freeze. Actually, somatic coaching gives you some of that. You can start understanding actually where is your fight scenario or where is your flight scenario, and is that helpful for the situation? Is that helpful for you?
What James was getting into there, which we have talked about, is what are some breathing exercises that you can implement to change how you show up in situations. So he was talking about box breathing. My co-host, Terentia Brown, also very much implements this within our coaching practices, which are what are some things to get in control of your own emotions, your own body. And I was discussing it briefly on even when I was attending a yoga session and understanding how you could become more connected to your body as a whole and how it shows up in leadership and how it shows up for you at work. So if you're tuning into this and going, well, what is somatic coaching and why is it so important now? It's about how you can really tune in and impact your nervous system, impact your body, impact the system, and really how you can connect to ensure that you can show up for your teams.
Yeah, so I was just talking about box breathing in terms of being able to settle your system down. There's also things like scanning where you just kind of notice and you can kind of scan slowly up your body. Just notice where your feet are and any experience you're feeling with your feet, whether it's heat or cold or it's kind of sensations like fizzing, etc. And just notice where there might be some tension. So again, it's just creating a slightly different view, but taking you out of your head and your thinking part and getting more into a somatic part. And then somatic coaching and some of the stuff we do is also really about how you hold yourself and your shape. So there's kind of three main dimensions with it. So one is height, where you actually get dignity. And so, there might be times where you're facing into something you don't want, where actually you can shrink down and lower your height and lose some of your dignity. There could be things that you're facing where actually you close in. So this is about width and about openness. And then the third dimension is kind of back to front, which is around time. There are elements where you can start noticing a bit of your shape and actually shifting your shape to actually get a very different experience. So Amy Cuddy does a lot of this work around power posing, for example, where again, there's lots of theories about actually posing in slightly different ways creates different chemical reactions in the body that allows you to show up differently. So, when I was starting out my practitioner, I noticed that I would feel quite a lot of tension across my chest, particularly where I was going into what I perceived to be quite a difficult conversation. Normally it's that kind of fight mode where I'm having to kind of get ready and I'd lean over. So part of the practice is actually just to kind of settle and actually open up again and bring my breathing back down. So I'm not walking in tense to something that I think is going to be tense. And often, when I did, guess what? It ended up being that kind of tense thing that I was fearing. So part of this is to just start noticing some of those things, but then also starting to regulate your nervous system so that you can show up in a slightly different way.
Do you know what I'm picking up from this? Because obviously we chat around how your body language can impact other people, but it sounds like a lot more of like that body language is rooted in something. And that piece is what's impacting your own behavior. And actually, we're trying to get to the root cause of why your body is deciding to show up that way. And as you were mentioning, like puffing out the chest. And I'm sure there's even more advanced pieces where people, I know people in high levels of stress can have like, they can get, rashes and different things where your body reacts poorly to an advanced case, but there might be things that you're doing that it sounds like they're, and I love talking about this, so we won't go off too off piece, but it's a lot to do with our makeup and our evolution and actually things that our body are now putting into the normal workplace that actually are going, hey, the way I'm reacting to this is rooted in emotion and is rooted in historical behaviors. And actually, if I can control it, whether that be through breathing exercises or other tools to allow me to show up calm, collected, available, not only is it good for the conversation you're having, or especially if you're going into like a conflict or a tough scenario, but it's also probably better for your well-being. So it's a win-win, really.
Yeah, completely. And I think we talked about, why is it important now? I think the amount of change and complexity that we all face right now is at times can be quite overwhelming, and it does create stress, and prolonged stress can create burnout. And so some of this is actually just tuning into sometimes the cost of situations where, the old adage is just head down, keep going, but it will catch up with you at some point. So some of this is actually, to your point about well-being, is just tuning into yourself about how you are and what you need right now. And it's that old cliche of, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. There's a bit about how you tune into what you need right now in order for you to be a better leader or better husband, father, or whatever the role that you're playing. And I think that's where it really starts with you before you start working on any other kind of connections that we might have with others.
Yeah, I feel like there's just this like we met with a company, a really cool company. I'm hoping to do a lot more work with them. I think we were starting to discuss it a little bit on our last call, but they want to develop more of like a device, kind of like your Fitbits or your watch, or whatever, that can actually feel what your stress levels. And when people start to get to a certain level of stress, the idea is that it make them aware. And I think you can even some of this stuff is on the Apple Watch and things like that. But it'll be like, hey, calm down, breathe, get calm. And I do think, unfortunately, and I've dealt with this with things within my own team, we get very worked up and very stressed and have very high anxiety or start to get into fight or flight mode so often in an environment that is, there's no need for either of it. We've replaced the tiger in the bushes with like, Peach in HR. I don't know, Peach, that's a terrible name. Rachel in HR has got some feedback from us from the wider team. And you start associating that with not your promotion and all of a sudden you are going to start demonstrating behavior or breathing or not operating in a, I don't want to say a healthy environment, because obviously it wouldn't be too healthy, but like in a more complex feelings that sometimes it's hard for people to recognize, hey, I need to do something about this. And we end up just operating in those feelings or those emotions or that breathing, and it gets heightened. Like when you see people go through panic attacks and their breathing really intensifies. And one of the first things you need to be able to do is like, hey, let's just slow down, take a beat. And I think in many corporate environments, people go through those things. We've talked about imposter syndrome on the podcast and different elements where human beings are not realizing how they show up or what they could do to impact themselves.
I think that's really spot on. And I think that some of somatic coaching is really helping you try and get clues to some of that even before, you get to that point of realization. Like I say, there's huge amounts of data that kind of gets generated for you before you have, unfortunately, I hope you don't, but if you got to a point of a panic attack or a breakdown, there are clues that the body will be showing you leading up to that. And part of the somatic practice is building that awareness. So you don't have to get to that point. You can kind of self-regulate before that. Again, I think about the call that you're not looking forward to make. You'll feel it just before you pick the mobile up. There's some somatic clues around how you're feeling about this. There's an opportunity there just to regulate yourself before you go into the call. And as I said, there is quite a lot of focus up till now about that kind of real cognitive ability and thinking, but we don't really kind of notice what's going on from the head down. And there's a wealth of information in here that can help you, like I say, manage situation, manage stress, and just be more you.
We talked about, I think when we were prepping for the session, that the gut feeling that people get, that we say, it's not this crystal ball. It's, this incredible, your body's this insane computer that is analyzing all of these different things about people, as you were mentioning about your kids in the playground, but we're doing that constantly, and it's funny how much decision-making from human beings is built on feeling. In fact, it's amazing. We had a podcast we're chatting about meetings, and it was saying like how much information you retain in a meeting drops significantly unless you're taking notes, or we now have our AI buddies that join the meet and stuff. In the first, it's something like within the first 24 hours, you've lost 50%. In the first 48 hours, it's more than 60 or 70% of the meetings lost. By the end of the week, you've retained 10% of that meeting. But how you felt about it or the feelings that you've had, you do retain. And we talk around even how people, human memory is quite, let's say, broad. I love this on like detective shows, right? They say like eyewitness testimony is so difficult it's actually not like reliable evidence, but because we are so emotional and we are caught up in how that interaction actually made us feel. And so what's maybe one thing they could do to explore somatic awareness in their own lives?
Yeah, I mean, look, I suppose I'm not going to answer your question as simple as that, unfortunately. But I think I'd say two things, actually. I'd say two things. So one is it's about that kind of self-regulation and kind of noticing and starting to become more aware. So I think, like I say, some of the simple breathing techniques, go onto YouTube and have a look at things like centering practice. If you look at Richard Strozzi, Heckler Strozzi, who founded the Strozzi Institute, he's a massive guru in the somatic space, but he does a really beautiful centering practice, and that really will just help people regulate down. Just try it. As you get more practice with it, you can do it quicker and get more into it, but there's a real calming effect that allows you to have a different perspective. So one is actually just practice either breathing or centering, just to see what reaction and change that creates in you. I mean, you talked about the gut, and another really lovely technique as a starter is just to have a think about a situation and actually take it from different lenses. So what's your mind, what's your head saying about the situation? What's your heart saying about the situation? And then what's your gut say? And actually where the differences are. And then also just notice what it feels like when you start articulating that out loud. You're starting just to build some of that somatic muscle, if you like, and that noticing. And so again, with every kind of challenge we have, you can kind of break it down into, what's the head, heart, gut, and what's the difference? Where's that kind of conflict, and what's that feel like for you as you go through it? And again, I find it an incredibly helpful exercise for people who might be having a dilemma that they're, procrastinating on.
I love the cadence bit, because we were there's the thing we were chatting around earlier around the footballers or golfers, or I was thinking in my head like Johnny Wilkinson, or when you see people take conversion kicks. And I used to have someone on my rugby team actually used to always do the same thing, where he picked up his boot, flicked off a piece of dirt on his boot. And I'm like, there's no way there's dirt on your boot every time, but he just got so used to that rhythm to take a kick in a high pressure environment. And it was interesting when you connected it, because at the time I was like, I think people just do it out of like force of like, it's almost like tradition, or, when people wear the same lucky socks, or I thought it was something but you connected it to somatic coaching. Can we open that up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, what you're kind of experiencing is a reset for people. There's a practice or a set of actions they're taking to reset. You think about a golfer on the tee, and as they tee off, there is a particular practice that they're going through. But notice when there's something that happens that distracts them, they actually stop, step back, and then kind of go back to it and go through the whole reset. It's not like they'll just ignore it and then hit the ball. And so actually what I find is you'll see set plays in certain kind of areas or arenas where actually this is all about the somatics of how you reset your body and yourself to get ready for what you need to do. If it takes you off course, so there's a trigger, actually they've just stopped and reset again rather than kind of carried on with the fight or flight stuff that we've talked about. And I do find, like I kind of mentioned before, that analogy, I guess, to sporting does kind of lend itself for the people who, do some sport. Somatic coaching, I think, can work across a very wide field of people. But I've found people who have done sport to a good level, or particularly yoga, because there's similar kind of trends around the way you think about chakras, for example. But it allows you to kind of have more of a awareness of what's going on beyond just the thinking part of you. So I see people kind of lend themselves to somatic coaching in a really powerful way, particularly when you've kind of started to develop some of that awareness.
We had a guest on a few weeks ago from Stanford School of Business who was discussing, I think it's Richard, I hope I've got his name right, and he does improv. And I remember doing improv in school, and actually performers on, like, public speaking for me can be weirdly, I used to be amazing at it when I was a kid. And then for some reason, as I got older and I started caring about other people's feelings, there are some exercises I used to do where you like grip your hands or rink your feet, or little things that would help me control going into what I find a very high pressure environment. And I loved when we were connecting the dots, because you were saying, actually, people who've gone through sports or performances or whatever lean more into this because they're quite used to. I mean, I got to play, luckily, long enough rugby at a decent level. And I remember being able to just be like, I need to reset. I'm going into something where my butterflies are still very high. I'm still very nervous. And that's where a lot of those breathing techniques or prep or weird routines I used to go through before a game, which were very similar. And I love the idea of saying to people, how can you apply that to work? Because we keep talking about the corporate athlete. It's been becoming a recurring theme. Like, why can't you treat your professional job similar to what people should be doing in high pressure sporting or those sort of things? So it's interesting to see that connection, because I think it's something that people can relate to who are joining this session.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of the stuff you're talking about with kind of like clenching your fists and kind of releasing is actually tension coming out your nervous system. And it's also actually a distraction. So as you're walking into a stressful environment, you could be thinking all sorts of stuff. You'll have voices in your head saying, what's going to happen here, or, you might have an inner critic that's going to start saying how things are going to fail. But actually kind of noticing your hands, kind of thinking about your feet is a distraction and a way of just coming out of your head and again, resetting. It's super important. And I think, there's lots of, again, theories about kind of, the two speeds of the brain, or the kind of chimp paradox about Steve Peters. It's a really complex thing up here, but actually sometimes this doesn't serve you because there's an override in some of the thought patterns. And so somatics is about actually how you come out of that and kind of settle, particularly that chimp, if you like, back into a more settled way that actually you can see the kind of wood for the trees for what you're doing.
Well, the human brain is so incredible. I mean, our ability to imagine and create, and unfortunately, it means it can run wild on us sometimes. I always think of like great leaders I've observed, when there are things that aren't going quite right, or there's challenges or whatever, they can reset or not make assumptions. I mean, one of the things I say a lot to my team are, don't make that assumption, because when people don't have information, your brain's just, refiring on what could be all the possible situations, and all of a sudden actually being able to reset and go, all right, look, calm down. You don't know those things. Let's action what we can, and what are the facts, and let's turn on the logical part rather than some of the emotional and fight or flight mentality and stuff can be extremely valuable. And I think some of these breathing exercises or that thought process can lean into that.
Yeah, for sure. And like I say, that the idea of actually scanning your body and looking for wisdom from other parts of you is about trying to stop maybe the paralysis that you can get by overthinking things and being over analytical. It's something that definitely was a derailer for me. Kind of earlier on in my career, I would analyze and dwell and reflect and overanalyze points. And so actually having a practice that settles me, but also gives me a different way to think about actually, where's my heart in this? What's it mean for me? Where's my emotions in this? And how do I kind of listen to some of that? And that just helped unlock me and helped me make some decisions that kind of moved on that actually I was getting stuck up here with.
I was having this conversation with Elif, who's a legend, who's on the other end and helping us with the podcast, about business development and how even after over a decade of doing it, I still get like butterflies and nervous and worried. And I do go through a bit of a routine and a structure before I step on that next call. Because if I don't, I still very much enjoy it. But I'll make mistakes, or I'll be reacting to what's in front of me rather than keeping that level of consistency. So it's interesting to see all the applications of how it could be useful. Let me pivot. Well, it's not really a pivot because we're on the same conversation, but we were chatting around. I think there's been this rise of AI environment. I think it's interesting. We were at HR Connected, HR leadership event in Paris a year or 2 years ago, and you could see all these AI tools popping up for coaching and emotional support and recruitment. And, we're taking away this human element. And it was interesting. We were chatting around this human connection piece, that gut feel. And interesting, Trevor Noah was on a podcast recently, and he was talking about how, AI actually doesn't feel any of those things. It doesn't have that connection, or it fakes it. It frames it so you think it's connecting with you. But why do you think in this digital age, as we start to go into this next change, this somatic coaching and the human element is so critical?
I think it's really important for a number of reasons, actually. I think, the pace of technology has just been phenomenal. And I think that creates more uncertainty, more complexity, and more risk of overwhelm. So I think it's ever more present, the ability to just kind of self-regulate in that really complex world. And you're not going to know everything. Almost back to your improv. The art of the improv is to be in the moment and go with that moment, not trying to work everything out. And I think that's an element of leadership that we'll see with technology. I also believe that technology is potentially going to enhance the human connection. It's actually more of an augmentation rather than purely a replication or a substitution. And actually, when I look at technology now, I mean, it's going up the curve really quickly. So this is definitely a moment in time. But what it's doing really well is automating a lot of repetitive stuff. And it's also doing a lot of stuff that maybe is unsafe. So I think about, depressingly, things like the war at the moment. A lot of that is now with drones and technology. So it's freeing up, if you like, the human to have slightly different perspective and role in life. I still think people will need to connect with other people. We're social animals. And when you think about, even just selling, you're selling really from someone. I still think you need that human connection to make that work. And you're right, AI now is really starting to proliferate in things like coaching and leadership development. I read somewhere that coaching bots are now starting to get up to kind of practitioner levels with certified governing bodies in coaching. So it's learning that cognitive part, but it hasn't learned the emotional part and that connection piece. And so my belief is that actually I think there'll be even more reason why we have to develop those kind of emotional skills and relationship skills, because actually technology is going to move that way. And I think there's going to be both a need for it, but also a dearth of that development as well. I look at a lot of career paths that are now starting to be taken over by some AI. What we really want is we still need a level of expertise with it, right? It's still making mistakes. My worry is, how do you get that expertise when some of those kind of early career jobs are now starting to be overtaken by AI? So I still think there's going to be a human element to it. And I saw this kind of phrase about, how we move from IQ to EQ to change quotient and now to human quotient, because actually there will still be a human element to our connection, whether it's to an AI tool and to a human or both. That kind of triangle is going to be quite an interesting one. But I still believe it's going to be there. Despite all the technology, it hasn't replaced being in the same room with someone. Teams allows us to connect with people across the globe, but it's still not the same as being in the same room. And there is something about that human connection that will still remain despite where technology is at the moment.
I don't want to. We'll get on different time. If I go down your AI channel too far, we'll be here for another hour. And if I put my anthropologist hat on, I'll also take us on a wild goose chase. But what I love is I think people forget that human beings evolved. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the biggest. The biggest part was our ability to communicate and cooperate and build relationships outside of a group of people of 10 to 15, and Neanderthals existed. They were much stronger, bigger. They had bigger brains than we did. Could have easily dwarfed us as the strongest sapien species. But human beings were able to do that because of our amazing ability to cooperate and build relationships and trust. I mean, I think it's something out of like monkeys and capuchin. They only have certain limited sizes that they can cooperate in. I think it's up to like 100, 150 as a capuchin monkey, or a bamboo, not a bamboo, that's not right, a baboon, that they can study because it's built off of direct relationships and what they can witness and see in person. And we are operating companies on massive levels of cooperation and feeling. So, these things, they make a massive difference because you need people to be able to follow you as a leader and connect with you as a leader. And it's not all verbal, and it's not all direct, and it's not all stuff that they can witness. And I do fear with AI integration, it's a very easy tool to roll out, to go, hey, look, we've got AI coaching. If you need help, log into the app. And I'm sure it's an amazing cost-saving initiative. That's what I kept seeing at the HR conferences, which was driving me nuts. But I agree with you that the human element is so critical. And unfortunately, people in isolation, and we're seeing this already in the age of technology, dating apps and teams and remote working, is it doing a lot for human beings who want to be sociable? No, we're starting to see people want to come back in the office on their terms, arguably, but that is, part of that responsibility. So, from a coaching perspective, from a somatic element, this has been honestly a tremendous episode. James, we've had our ups and downs with it for sure. I know Trincia will be kicking herself not to have been here. But to wrap up this episode, what can we leave the audience with? And I would love as well, in case people are interested in getting in contact with you and your coaching services, to maybe your time to plug. But I'd love to let people know how they can reach out to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd love to do is just kind of leave the listeners with just to kind of open the door about the power of somatic coaching, because I've seen it with myself and firsthand, being a practitioner with others, just the immense power it can have to open up people and help people with the challenges they're facing. And it can start, like I say, with really simple things like breathing techniques and awareness. There's more and more coming out, but I definitely point people towards things like the Strozzi Institute, who are kind of leading lights in this field. But I'm convinced by the power of this, and I think it will become more and more mainstream as we go through the next kind of period, particularly with technology advancement. I'm super passionate about it. It's a practice that I continue to do with myself, but also with clients, because I really see the benefit of it. But it just starts with that first awareness, and it's how you build that muscle of awareness, and then you can make choice, and through that choice you can take different actions. So if anyone does want to contact me, probably the best thing to do is email me at james.blackpolarbear@gmail.com. Happy to come back to you. But like I say, it's been a great episode. Really enjoyed the conversation.
I love the name of the company as well, Black Polar Bear, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I did it because black polar bears have black skin, and you don't often see that with the fur that they wear, and it's about how you go a bit deeper than just skin depth, and that's the premise of my coaching.
Thank you everyone for joining the podcast today. This has been a tremendous episode, and I really encourage you, if you're enjoying these sessions, join us again next week. But if you're interested in coming on the show, or you want to know some more information, email us at info@impeltalent.com. Please check us out. You can subscribe on Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. Actually, we're on all stations, or subscribe to our YouTube. And thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you all next week.
Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.